Hello everyone, I'm Jeremy Cox and I have the pleasure and privilege of being the moderator for this roundtable, and I hope you enjoyed the videos that I saw earlier from all of the speakers. I must say I feel quite humbled by their extensive knowledge, and there were lots of little nuggets of gold throughout, and I'm hoping to tease out some more in the course of this roundtable. So let me start off. Oh, that's better. My hearing's just improved. Let me start off by asking a general question. And actually, it's one from the audience. I saw a guy called Jürgen Sommer was saying, if joining an existing ecosystem is a valid approach, how many big ecosystems will survive or be created? So I think behind that, there was, how long is this phenomenon going to last for? Will it get filled up? Will that be the end of it? Will you be able to join them, or will it be too late? Over to whoever wants to take the lead on that.
I'll start.
Thanks, Vince.
I think market dynamics will drive, and market effects will drive how many ecosystems there are. You're starting to see the evolution of the hyperscalers certainly being the largest of the ecosystems. The Microsoft, Amazons, Googles, Salesforces of the world, driving ecosystem behavior. You'll start to see a subset of these as ISPs by virtue of necessitation of driving performance in business, and partnerships being the underlying.
I think this is spot on. I would add to that there's ecosystems within ecosystems. So once you do join an ecosystem, it just so happens that you have a small set of maybe partners that you work with on a regular basis. And that becomes your own ecosystem. In a way, you become your own orchestrator, your own ecosystem of partners. So, and you see that continuing to happen.
Yeah, I would agree. In the data we see at Crossbeam, it's not that ecosystems are a universe of these hub and spoke relationship graphs that are all kind of floating around each other. It's all one huge interconnected graph, and it's just a question of how many degrees of separation any two companies are apart, rather than if they have these independent ecosystems where companies are sitting on an island just with their one major partner. So, I think they're not mutually exclusive. You can belong to them in one. They also have these really awesome little atomic network effects where you have the vision of an ecosystem be realized. And I think because of that, you get this long tail effect where the number of ecosystems out there are nearly infinite, actually. It's just a question of how large an individual one can get.
Excellent. Anyone else like to chip in on this? Or I'll move on to the next.
I would like
Joyce.
To chip in. Yeah. So I mean, to your comment, right? Are we too late? Well, it's never too late to join an ecosystem, and I think that's the beauty of ecosystems. That joining an ecosystem can help you ramp up fast with all the skill set and specialization needed as a partner to ramp up. So I think that's the beauty of an ecosystem. If you are, let's say, worried that you're too late, then join one, and we can help you with all the attributes, that you need.
Yeah, I really love Joyce's comments. And the thing to remember is that there's always only going to be a very small number of big generalists for an ecosystem, but there's always room for niche specialists. So if you're joining an ecosystem, really think about what's your area of specialization, because it carves out your niche.
That's a great comment, Tony.
Even if the gap that you have is time to market, you can solve that also with partnering in an ecosystem.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Now, companies who are sort of new to this whole idea of ecosystems, or perhaps just put a toe in the water, what advice would you give them for, who should be in the strategy team to figure out which ecosystem to join, what their part in that ecosystem might be, and a plan to get going.
and all of the people to really focus on how do we execute something that's simple and niche and differentiates. Strategies that are too complicated with too many moving parts tend to not work well.
Yeah, I'll pile on. What we've seen is folks get the purpose of an ecosystem. They believe it's competitive advantage, but getting that culture all the way within the organization and ownership, who's actually going to interface within the ecosystem, lay out their requirements, engage with other partners, that needs a culture change. And it's easy to say it at the top, but it really needs to be kind of that grassroots, everybody in the organization. So
I agree. I think it's almost also a cultural aspect to it. That is, but also based on culture. And I think the right mindset that your organization wants to be part of a bigger environment than just the traditional, let's say, a customer or a supplier part. I think that's the main driver.
Anton is right on in terms of growth mindset, driving the right behavior within the organization, across the executives within the organization, and that partnering and this ecosystem approach is not departmental, it's organizational.
That's a great point, Vince. I was going to say reporting structure is kind of a bit of a moving target sometimes, where the partnerships function historically has sat under sales. I think, our data shows it typically does still, but we are seeing the emergence of things like this chief ecosystem officer role, right? And other versions of this where it actually cuts much more horizontally through the org chart. And I think that it just allows for a form of that conversation to take place where ecosystems are playing a bigger role than just the immediate application of driving net new sales day to day and tactically.
And I guess that's where strategy is no longer cheap, to pick up on Tony's comment, where it has to be a sort of, or in the most successful ecosystem plays, it's where the entire organization is hell bent on creating value for the customers they wish to serve, but within that ecosystem. And then going on about the growth mindset, Vince, that you brought up there, it's not thinking so much tactically about how many sales am I going to make this quarter, but how can we take a giant leap to expand, beyond what were our wildest dreams.
That's absolutely it. Moving beyond what I'll call the fixed mindset of the past, and the classic role of the chief revenue officer of the past, which was let's hire another 100 salespeople and go after this directly as a part of the performance of the organization.
Sounds good. I think, Joyce, you picked up in your discussion with Leahanne of these ecosystems. I'm thinking there are lots of startup ISVs who are thinking, hey, I've seen a problem. I think, how do we get into this think about in terms of which ecosystem to go after? And
and you can't go wrong in that one. It's good already that ISPs feel need to join an ecosystem fast, get their robots but I always set your goals and be a ecosystem. You want to be better at agency, that be modernized, and you want a revenue fit or negotiation, and you need an ecosystem for that. do you want to get listed, right, on an ecosystem with a product offering? And then those decisions also make sense to say, like, okay, which ecosystem has for me the biggest reach in the industry that I want to sell, for example, with my solution. So it really depends on what they want. But I think the beauty of ecosystems, you can help them within all these areas. And I always see that as a circle, as a flywheel, I would say. You start with, more on the technical side where you can help those ISVs, revamping their application and help them eventually innovate with their offerings. But once the offering is built and built future-proof, you can help them list and sell and drive activities for those specific solutions with partners and motions together, how we go to customers. So, I mean, there is just a whole bunch of things attached to it. And I think that's the whole beauty, that we can help it, with all.
Excellent. One of the things I noticed, that there are lots of moving parts or lots of things to think about regarding ecosystems. You've got the technical side, data we've seen, that plays a massive part in this, and data sharing. Values, the culture that we've already touched on, play a massive part in all this. Then you've got the skills, and whether they should be technical skills or business skills or both. There's the risks associated with these ecosystem partnerships, and also managing the risk for the delivery of the value to the end customer. So of all of these different things, what would you say are the top 2 or 3 things to really think about and to focus on to kickstart your ecosystem play? And that's open to anyone.
Can I just jump in on that? I think there's another element. I agree with everything that you raised, Jeremy, but first and foremost to me is trust, because trust is really interesting. It's both binary in that nothing will happen as we join an ecosystem unless there's a level of trust, but the degree of trust that we can create determines the speed at which people will move with us, the amount of information they'll share with us, the access they'll give us to other people. So trust and value is first and foremost. And we also need to bank on the law of self-interest. We need clarity about the role that we would play. So we really need to think, if we are an ISV, for example, joining an ecosystem with a much larger brand, yes, we need clarity about the problem that we solve for the end customer, but also the problem or the opportunity that can be realized for the ecosystem that we join with those other players is really important, because people will trust our intent, but they'll also trust the law of self-interest. So they need to see that we all have swim lanes that make sense for all of us to actually play in.
Tony brings up a really great point around what I will call shared values and shared vision for the partnership.
Yeah.
Before we lock arms in partnership, we need to identify that first. And trust is the lifeblood driving across the partnership, no matter what.
I would say, if I were to start, and we probably have already started ourselves, but I think trust is very important. But the first thing I would look at is, what does the customer say, or the potential customer, and what do they need? Do I have the people and the technologies and the services available to service that need? And then how do I go out and find, matchmaking, find who has those skills, and then that trust element comes into play between the partners. But then I think you can together build that trust or reinforce that trust with your customer.
Maybe related to that, I think in an ecosystem, it's also you build trust by sharing. So maybe you can bring something to the table that maybe will not be paid for immediately, but brings the trust because you share that content, or you share that specific functionality or utility.
I'll just
We
pile
call
on.
that investing trust.
This piece on trust is so interesting to me, because in building a platform to make an ecosystem more efficient, we went out and surveyed a bunch of partners, our advisory members. What was the number one piece they said you need to deliver? And that was deliver a trustworthy ecosystem. Now, how do you deliver that? Because it's an individual, right? You got to be honest. with each other. You got to share all the points you guys made. But when you have a digital platform that's trying to cultivate ecosystems and partnerships, you have to put the steps in there that everybody's going to be very comfortable in sharing and executing. The vetting process, the onboarding process, setting expectations. But it's absolutely priority number one for anybody who's joining an ecosystem.
I would agree. Those feel very very much in the category of table stakes, right? It's kind of this binary thing where you don't have a value story together, where you don't have trust. Really, even going down the road in the first place is kind of a non-starter. And I think it's an interesting kind of question around, if those two dominoes fall correctly, what have you unlocked, right? And then what can you do next? And I think that's where you start to get into these questions around, okay, I have the partner, I have the trust, I have the value story. How do I actually scale this partnership in a way that is measurable and repeatable and actionable? And that's, maybe you're getting up pretty high in the hierarchy of needs right there, but it's something worth exploring and understanding, because when that data starts to come into the fray and come to the table, what comes with data is the ability to build playbooks and build automations and actually measure results and kind of create these really awesome feedback loops where you can justify continuously investing and scaling these partnerships. So I think it's everything everybody said almost came out in exactly the right order, right? It's like a basic baseline of trust, a use case that is shared, a deepening of trust through data being shared, and then applications of that data to actually make this something that can scale in the same way that the rest of your company is scaling.
You mentioned hierarchy of needs, and in fact, often I find my sort of focus area is on customer engagement, and so it's, if you like, the internal ecosystems rather than the external ecosystems. But one of the observations I would make is how technology is evolving to more of a platform play versus isolated, siloed systems, and that looking at it as a sort of hierarchy of needs, with the ultimate at the top being the delivered outcome, and the bottom bit is what I would call the technology plumbing, the hyperscaler stuff that you all need. And therefore, if I look at it like that, and I know that IP came up a lot in various conversations, it's kind of trying to figure out where you play in that hierarchy. Are you on the delivery end of that value? Are you bringing something to the party that can, go that last mile to generate the value the customer's seeking? Or are you part of the plumbing at the other end, or somewhere in between, where maybe you fit into some functional jigsaw that solves a departmental or even cross-departmental solution? Does that sort of hierarchy of needs, if you like, is that a useful model for thinking about ecosystems, or am I just being far too philosophical?
Jeremy, I think the point you're raising is at the very top is the client and the client solution, but around the client solution might be several of these point solutions or partnerships coming together, the seats at the table, if you will, and those seats at the table complete the entire, or the complete solution, the whole solution. They may be systems integrators involved. There might be several IS point solutions and an underlying hyperscaler cloud-based platform that we're driving against that ultimately drives that client's needs, right? So I think about it, I see the point, and I like the approach of the hierarchy, Maslow's hierarchy, but I think it's almost a little bit more of a surround in my judgment.
Sure. Okay.
My thoughts on this when we think about hierarchies, I'm a big fan of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but the thing I see in the tech industry and the services industry is most people are very busy building the wrong conversations. And they talk about themselves and their capabilities, and then what they think that can end up doing for the client, and then ultimately deliver some kind of result. But what we'll need to do is we need to start at the top of the pyramid in being laser focused about the improved result that the person we're seeking to serve can drive in their role. So what's the improved result? And then what people do is they then jump straight to their capability as an enabler of the result. And that's a mistake. The next level down in that hierarchy needs to be the strategy that achieves the result. What's the strategy that achieves the result? And then we get to the third level down in this pyramid around what are the capabilities you need to enable the strategy. So we just need to recognize that nobody cares about us and what we do until they first understand why we matter to them. Why do we matter to them? What's their opportunity to drive and improve results? What would be the strategy that could achieve it? And then how do you enable that strategy? And then that's where the ecosystem comes in, and they understand the contextualization of all of the moving pieces.
Where's our thumbs up emojis?
Excellent, excellent. Right, now then, let's go on to another guest observation or question. And this comes from Christian Hess, who said, does GDPR get companies to be overprotective? And is it an obstacle to developing these ecosystems and maybe even to the trust? I'm slightly paraphrasing his question there, but what are your thoughts on that?
I would almost point this one to Bob because he's the data guy on the.
That's an easy one.
With my experiences working for multinational organizations where GDPR comes in as a factor, is you can protect the data, but share the right data in the process. With regards to ensuring that we have collaboration, we've identified the client, but maybe we're a little bit more guarded in terms of private data, PII.
Right.
Yeah, it does seem in the market like the existence of GDPR has definitely forced a part of the conversation about doing deeper collaboration between companies. It's forced a part of that conversation to the forefront, to the very first phone call, to the first 5 minutes of interacting with a new partner that you might work with. And in a lot of ways, we appreciate that because if you're going to get to a point of scale, or you're going to be using data in a repeatable way between companies that extends beyond just emailing spreadsheets back and forth kind of under the radar, you almost want that conversation forced. And we started Crossbeam in the spring of 2018. I think it was April 2018, and GDPR had rolled out in March of 2018. So we call ourselves like the first post GDPR company. Like we didn't have gaps to it, right? We actually built a platform with that in mind. And in a few ways, it's almost been a blessing because it's made it very clear why it's actually necessary to have a platform rather than kind of person-to-person chaos in terms of this data exchange. Because really what GDPR is doing is creating a common set of legal standards and language around how data is treated, how individuals have their rights to have themselves removed from data sets, how cross-border data transfers happen. And all those things are kind of necessary table stakes to be resolved if you want to do these things at scale. So does it slow things down? Yes. Is it this holy evil thing that blocks us from being collaborative as companies? I'd say no. I think it's a framework by which we've been able to just build more structure around what we all do.
I think it's even, if I look at my company, it was even, I think it's rather an enabler, like other types of compliance, like ISA 8, 34.2 or 3000. I think it builds trust if you are having yourself audited by third parties and being very transparent on how you handle stuff and data. So I think in our case, we are dealing with a lot of companies and a lot of trustworthy data. And we've invested a lot in those types of compliance and we are using it more or less even as a differentiator, more or less, how compliant we are and how transparent we are and how much we have ourselves audited by third parties.
That's something that's a place that we need to be. But when you look at two companies that start to work together and, they say, bring your pipeline to the table. And you want to talk about names of companies and titles within that company and, how much you've sold in so far. Anton, how do you have that first conversation?
I think that's where I think never in the first conversation, you never ask that type of data. You just build trust based on how you have been handling that kind of stuff with others before this conversation. So I think that's part of the trust is very personal. I think it's still a people business, and the other part is if you have proven trust being trustworthy in the past, and you can even prove that, it helps in the discussion that you will be a trustworthy person if I will have that discussion with you. So I think that's more or less the way I would handle that part.
I think you're starting to see the platforms like Crossbeam and PartnerTap come to fruition because of that need, Leahanne. And these organizations deciding first what data we'll share before, in fact, invoking and having those deeper conversations.
And
But
then
yeah, one of the
having-
cool features I think that isn't always appreciated too in that world is you don't need to share specific account names or titles or things like that as that first dip a toe in the water. One of the neat things you can do in Crossbeam is say, I want to compare our sales pipelines. Let's look at the total dollar value of opportunities across the what's in the middle of that Venn diagram, or we can maybe segment that out by industry or segment that out by title. But you have this aggregation, right? You have, there are 17 deals we could collaborate on where the buyer has this title and they're in this particular geo. But you don't have to say who those 17 are. And maybe that's just enough motivation for you to say, okay, let's spend the energy to build this trust. Let's sort out the GDPR questions, because if we get to the other side, there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And I think that's something that's, is a typical motion for people getting connected to new partners.
I agree with everything everybody said. I'll just pile on one more point, and it's interesting because that trust piece keeps on coming back, right? And so for us, because we're kind of matchmaking, they identify as an opportunity where they have skill gap, and now we're going to find somebody else that can fill that skill gap. We never collect an end user data point on that, so it's very important for our members. And two, before they get connected, they enter into a partnering agreement. Think that 4 or 5 NDA, you're not going to hire employees, you're not going to go out to the customer without us. But it's setting the table so you can have that open discussion really now about this customer situation. And very important for partners to feel comfortable that they're going into that environment. You can just do so much in a platform. Eventually people actually need to talk together, right? And that's where it really happens.
And I guess the flip side of trust, or maybe goes alongside trust, is the reputation. So you need the trust in the first place to sort of start building those relationships between partners. But also, in doing so, there's a risk. There's a reputational risk if you choose the wrong partner. So how do you manage that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, what is it that humans make a decision about whether or not they want to engage with you within the first 5 or 6 seconds of engagement? I think the same holds true in partnerships. Like we should know as part of our triaging exercise which organizations we want to partner with from a reputational perspective, and what's going to be transactional, not partnership. Right? It might necessitate from a revenue perspective engaging with an organization that is of a more dubious reputation in order maybe to make a client happier or to fulfill an obligation to shareholders. But in fact, that's not true partnership.
I think if you're starting to look at scaling partnerships, always a challenge for you seeing the whites of the eyes of another person and getting that first 5 seconds meet. Are you going to move forward with them? So in scaling, one of the things that we like to do is get endorsements, and an endorsement from a player in the ecosystem endorsing another player. It not only says they have the skills, but it knows it's how to play in the sandbox. And then over time, endorsements build up, and everybody's going to say, hey, these are the guys I really want to play with, because they know how to play. They have the skills. So, and I always look at it, everybody can do the partnership, but scaling it, that's really the challenge, right?
Sure. It's interesting because one of the comments that Cassandra brought up earlier on, it was really, I think she posed the question at the end, which was, in these perhaps larger organizations where they have lots of different partner managers, perhaps tied to particular products or whatever, they're often tripping over themselves trying to form partnerships with the same partners. So it's kind of a bit chaotic. And she says she sees that quite a lot. How do you solve that?
Can I just jump in on that? The thing I see in ecosystems, vendors trying to build out a partner network, is there are just hundreds and hundreds of hours spent with people selling to each other, but there's no revenue done at the end of the day. Right. So where everything gets traction is when we identify a real customer in the marketplace that has a significant problem or a huge opportunity that they could realize if we were able to work together to help them go and be successful. So where it all succeeds or fails is let's focus on a joint customer where we can team together to go and deliver an amazing result. And if we become part of an ecosystem or we're building out a channel strategy, if we don't end up very quickly focusing on real opportunities that'll convert to revenue, then all we're doing is we're in this love fest of endlessly selling to each other and building out relationships that don't end up monetizing. And momentum is everything in an ecosystem and relationships. If we don't build momentum, it'll just die.
Should it be repeatable though, Tony, or purely transactional or opportunistic that drives that ecosystem?
It can certainly be both. I had the privilege of coordinating two global multinational vendors that often compete, an ISV, and then a niche service provider. So 4 organizations work together. They did a deal worth well over $100 million just last year when I was working with them to a massive government department. But it all began with one of the big 2 coming to the others saying, hey, based on our intimate understanding of the customer and our relationships with them, they have an opportunity to drive improved results in this area. We're building out a plan to help them do it, but we know there's pieces missing. We want to collaborate. We want the 4 of us to collaborate together. It'll mean that we'll need to trust each other and we'll need to accept that where there's overlaps, what are we willing to let go of to be part of working together as a team? So it all began with trust and it delivered an amazing result for the 4 organizations, but more importantly for the end customer. And that solution is not necessarily repeatable, but there was a huge reward for everybody. So sometimes we'll be building repeatability and other times we'll be focused on an individual client.
Okay, cool. Right, let's go for I think we're expecting bear with me, a question from the audience. Oh, no, that hasn't come through yet. Apologies for that.
Actually,
right,
I can see it. Maybe
can you?
I
can't.
Out, yeah. I don't know why. What quality is required that is unique to ecosystems? I don't know who the question is from, but he or she said, while I wholeheartedly agree on the trust point, it's the answer for any.
What's really interesting about Tony's example from the $100 million deal with a lot of very large vendors involved is what's amazing about ecosystems, and I think what's bringing in this ecosystem era is particularly on the ISV side, as the API economy has matured, the ability to build these modern stacks of technology and vendors and service providers that we used to live in a world where the complexity or you had a very, very large top market deal. Is city in these layers, kind of the glue that holds together these stacks of technologies. And as a result of that, the need to build custom technology, to service that technology, to train people on it, to sell it has thinned out as well. And when you think about what that change brings, it means that whether it's $100 million deal or a $1 million deal, or many modern SaaS companies are selling INL contracts at $5,000 or $10,000, and they still participate in ecosystems. They still strive to be. So when you talk about that is not necessarily there in partnerships. I think it is the ability to repeat a playbook or a methodology around bringing these deals together, that while you may never have the same configuration again of technologies and of partners and whatnot, the muscle memory that you gain and the functionality that you create in delivering that is repeatable in some other permutation. And it really is just leveraging the way in which technology is built in kind of a cloud-first mindset at this point. And it creates this unlock where partnerships might have been much more ad hoc and bespoke. Ecosystems scale. And I think the scale is really that unique quality that's differentiating here.
To add to what ecosystem is partners coming together on a common platform, right? Whether it's SaaS software vendors coming together with point solutions, but it's all being driven across a common platform. So from a qualitative perspective, I think that's what makes it unique versus the old ways that we partnered, 20 years ago.
I would agree with that. And I think to add to that is also, to add to that technology point is also to have, like, on a business side, a forward-looking, let's say, thinking in not just focusing on the business of today, but as well the business of tomorrow, and using ecosystems to get those insights. And, with those world-class technology at one hand side, right, to help ease of doing business, also looking at what growth opportunities in the future lies in front of me to be that forward-looking thought leader in the market and use ecosystems for that.
By the way, it was Dave Sobel who asked the question. Just another aspect to this, the second part of the question that he asked, what's different about partnerships and ecosystems? And I think when we traditionally talk about partnering in the IT community, we've always been partnering through a hierarchy. So resellers go up to distributors from side to maybe change.
I agree, and I think also that very often when we think of partnerships, we think one-on-one, and in platforms it could be one to many, many to many. So I think that's also a big differentiator compared to traditional partnerships.
We've got another really good question that's come through from Christian Hess. We are assuming all is, let me just read this correctly. We're assuming all is good with Partner and Trust, but what model we can
join our, the key word there, platform, right? But folks who join us say, what if somebody misrepresents themselves within the ecosystem? How do we handle that? And, that's a great question. And I go, man, I can't police everybody that joins. Yes, we have terms of use that you've got to represent yourself properly on the ecosystem. But what we can do is get feedback. How did the partnership work out? Are you willing to endorse another member? Back that endorsement. And eventually, but it is
company.
And it can all be destroyed in moments.
Seconds,
And,
yeah.
anybody who is part of an ecosystem, your right to stay in that ecosystem all depends on the level of integrity that you display in working with others. And people talk. So, my experience is you only get to do the wrong thing once, and then you're gone and you're out. And even if you stay in there, you'll find that people just don't want to work with you. So from a sanctioning point of view, the thing I find is peer interaction is typically what does this.
Another sort of memory from the this phrase, what sort of touches need to be part of this whole ecosystem play? And is it any different from the skills of the past?
There's some timeless truths, and for me, selling should be and is about making a positive difference in the lives of others. If that's not what we're seeking to do, then we're not acting with integrity, and we should get the hell out of what it is that we're doing to try and make money. So making money is a byproduct of making a positive difference in the lives of others, both professionally and for them in their personal life. So that is absolutely critically important. As part of that, as a seller, we need people that are genuinely curious about the world of the client, and that the intent that they convey is all around helping people improve results. We want to avoid this thing of having commission breath, where we seem to be all about us and what we're trying to sell. And again, if you're part of an ecosystem, think about dating. If any of us can remember back, that's sort of long ago. But, the reality is when you're dating, you'll be successful if you're relentlessly interested in the other person. The moment you're all about yourself, you just repel people. So if you're in an ecosystem, be all about what others are trying to achieve, and is there any way that you can help them? And can we work together to go and help a common end customer? And you do your joint territory planning, account planning, opportunity planning, all around specific markets or clients that are out there with problems. And then we've got that right intent.
Well, Tony, what you mentioned really is the altruistic approach. But what I would say is the reward structure of the organization needs to support ecosystems. And the reward system for the sellers of the past is individual, right? We rang the bell. We rewarded the individual contributor. And what we're seeing is this evolution to reward systems. Microsoft is a great example where the sellers are paid for co-selling activity. They're paid a portion of the partner's revenue, 30% of the deal, and they're also paid for the combined collaboration and what that drives collaboratively. So the reward system has to support the behavior, or else the salesperson is going to be off doing the same old bad behavior of the past.
Correct, and that's where the truly enlightened vendors make the remuneration for sellers either neutral, or they actually pay the sellers more if it goes through with a partner, rather than direct, right? So they try to make the coin-operated piece align with the values that they're seeking to drive.
Two other elements of the job description: initiative, so not being afraid to take that first move, and a fantastic memory if you're not going to automate.
That sounds like good advice to me.
Good advice.
I remember, Tony, this is perhaps one for you to start off, as it came from your discussion with Leahanne, was that leaders often measure the wrong things, or they have the wrong KPIs in place. What would you say are the most essential KPIs for tuning the ecosystem, or ensuring that it's moving in the right direction?
everyone's trying to drive certain results, and what that typically is around is revenue, new logo acquisition, retention, right? So those end results. The reality in business and life is that we can't actually manage the result. All we can actually manage are the activities that feed into objectives that then achieve the results. So in essence, we need to reward and celebrate results. And what we need to do is identify what metrics that we can manage that show that we're on the right path, and then manage the way that we execute. So I would say in ecosystems or partnerships, what we should typically build some KPIs around is not just the revenue. That's obvious. We're trying to drive revenue. Sure. But it should be around, for example, the amount of joint territory planning or joint opportunity planning, right? So are people actually showing trust and sharing information? Sure. And then are we securing meetings, creating new opportunities? So with KPIs, think about what are the lead indicators before the ultimate end result that we're trying to drive. And then how can we coach around accountabilities for getting us down that path?
We also talked about time to close, and not that you're just trying to decrease that time without rationale for it, but you just said earlier, the time to close with that first partner or with a new partner is really critical in establishing trust and wanting to work together.
Yeah, and that's a really good example because we can say we want this partnership or this deal closed by a date, but the reality is, do we have a mutual plan for both organizations to work together to make that happen? And we can actually review and manage and coach around the mutual plan, rather than just saying to the person, what's the date? Why is the date? Why is the date slipped? So we need to think about what are the things we can actually inspect and manage that get us down the path.
What always amazes me in looking at this data is on any individual deal, obviously you can look at time to close, you can look at contract value, but it's so consistent that when we look at clients on an aggregated basis and we say, hey, look back at your last quarter and segment the data by deals where partners were attached to the deal and deals where partners were not attached to the deal. And it is remarkable how consistent it is that the deals close faster and the dollar values are higher. Very, very, very consistently when you, not on every single individual deal, but when you roll it up and you actually look at the aggregate. And I think sometimes these things can get noisy and bumpy on a deal-to-deal basis, but if you're looking at it in a zoomed out fashion among the larger population, you should be able to tell a really compelling story in your internal analytics that, hey, ACVs are 30% higher and we close deals, a month faster on average once we have a partner attached. Whether that partner sourced the deal and is there from day one, or whether it's someone that gets connected in the middle of the closing process. And I think those kind of, really at the business intelligence layer, kind of senior leadership layer metrics, not only keep you honest and allow you to make sure they're trending in the right direction, but they really justify the narrative internally that gets back to that coin-operated salesman, which is to say, hey, look at this right here. If you want to do more deals, close them faster, raise ACVs, here's the hard data that supports it. And it's across the entirety of our company, not just that next single deal you're working on.
Yeah, and part of that is as well like customer retention, customer success, right? For us, that are more important metrics than just raising the ACV, because that will go ultimately with that. So those are metrics, for example, way more important. And in that case, you could reward multiple salespeople based on the success they drove with a single customer. And so there are so many metrics that's more important than. Obviously, you need to drive the dollars, right? And we are not like charity organizations, but there is so much attached to that.
Totally agree. Yeah.
And actually, you touched on something interesting there, Joyce, in terms of the retention and the development. So I guess the classic salesman is a hunter, maybe even a lone wolf that goes out, through magic or whatever, or persuasion or whatever it might be, brings in the fatted calf. Actually, that'd be quite easy, wouldn't it, fatted calf? But you get my meaning. But actually, to grow the revenue longer term and to keep customers coming back for more, that's more of a retention play. So, is there a need to shift to more of a farming kind of, a farmer versus a hunter kind of mentality? Or is that too simplistic?
I could jump in. I have I think an answer for this. I think some organizations provide a division of labor on this topic, right?
Yeah.
That there are different skill sets for the hunter versus the farmer. And in some organizations, and many organizations have client success organizations that look after the client after, in fact, the deal is won and the fatted calf is brought home.
Sure.
I think the reality is, and I definitely agree with you, Vince, there's this segmentation of roles, the inside seller, the field seller, the customer success person. But at the end of the day, what I think is needed is people need to be relentlessly focused on the positive outcome for the customer. And as you hand the opportunity over from the opportunity opener, that ISR, BDR, SDR role inside, to an account executive, a field seller, a senior seller, if the deal's opened in a way where the focus is on the commercial value of change, and then the seller is working with the client to help them nail their business case, to secure consensus, to manage all of their risks, and they build a mutual plan, and then that mutual plan helps transition over to delivery, that then transitions over post go live to customer success. If we do all of this well, the customer's focused on the positive outcomes they drive. They'll then be open to documenting that, which gives us, in essence, an internal case study that we can later turn into a published success story that we'd be able to publish, that results in us getting referrals. So we get this virtuous circle when everybody is relentlessly focused on the improved positive outcomes for the customer. What I see in big organizations is when you get the whale harpooning, dragon slayer, a hunter, that's going to go and win the big deal that feeds the company for a year, they often make a whole lot of promises, right, that other people have to try and deliver on. And you end up with the client falling into this trough of disillusionment. So if we're focused on driving improved outcomes, we can seamlessly transition through the life cycle in a really positive way, because all hunters need to also farm and all farmers need to hunt, is really the reality.
I'll make a comment, just bridging it, that farmer-hunter line. Our members, when we first created the platform, it was all about very tactical, solve skill gap for a highly qualified opportunity. And, I need that and I need it tomorrow. I mean, that's what we built the platform for. And very quickly, our members came back to us and said, I don't have a fully qualified opportunity, but I do need to partner with somebody to help me qualify the customer. Can we set expectations in your platform to partner for non-qualified opportunities? That extended, and now it's, can I also partner with somebody for business development reasons, to formulate go-to-market strategies within my territory? And now it extended even farther to the point where, can I collaborate? Because I really want to get the like-minded folks to talk about a new product, industry trend. So they're starting to use the ecosystem, not just to solve for, obviously, a customer situation, which is the ultimate, is ring the bell and get the revenue. But how can they work together for multiple reasons? So it's very interesting to see how that all changes.
And the role, the struggle some partners have is understanding the role that they play in navigating across their ecosystem partners organization, from that BDR to that hunter to that farmer or client success manager role, and knowing where they're going to be optimized for success in that organization and where they best play. And so I think that's often an area that I see that organizations struggle with in understanding how to partner.
Excellent. Have we another question coming from the...
Yeah, we do. We have one last question from Latrice. While I agree with rewarding behaviors and milestones that are key indicators of the outcomes we want, does the complexity of modern selling make this more difficult? And if I can maybe just weigh in on this, Latrice, there's three things. Yes, selling is complicated. Absolutely is, especially enterprise selling, especially working with a partner to get it done. There's three things to focus on. What's the compelling commercial value of change for the customer? Unless everyone has clarity about that, our deal's going to probably stall because it'll just get bumped down in priorities if the commercial value is not strong enough. So are we clear about the commercial value of change for the clients? Second thing, do they have consensus? Is everybody on board? The people that will need to provide resourcing or that can say no. So the things you need to manage is compelling commercial value, consensus with their team. And then the third thing is, do we have a mutual plan? Us, our partner and the customer all together for getting this done all the way through to being live, realizing the benefits. So if you focus on those three things amidst the complexity, you'll dramatically de-risk any deal.
Good question. Very good question. Perhaps one for John. As your platform is all about filling skills gaps, what would you say are the top skills gaps that you're seeing? And has it changed or is it changing?
You know what? It all started, like I mentioned, tactical skill gaps. I need somebody to go install 100 licenses of Beam. I need somebody with these certifications. I don't have them. And it was very much opportunistic. And it works very nicely for that. But then I think what ended up happening was folks saying, I like this idea of partnering. And by the way, a platform approach, I could scale it. Now it was, I need to partner with a somebody that has deep security skills because I don't have it, because my customer set needs those skills. So what we're seeing is much more business development activity versus just pure tactical. So it has transitioned, if you would, which we're very comfortable with, because that says that these guys are forming partnerships for long-term strategic reasons, not just to solve the problem of the day. But clearly, from a priority standpoint, it's all about cloud security, the typical list of skills that are hot in the market. That's what's
sure. Good. I think we've still got a couple of minutes left. Any more questions from the floor? In the meantime, what about demand generation? So, in B2B, it's been a struggle where the sales team think, well, they say they're leads, but actually they're rubbish. The marketing lot don't play ball. Account-based marketing was supposed to solve all that, but then there's a service play in there as well. So maybe account-based engagement. Suddenly, we've got an ecosystem in play. So how do we join up those dots? Wow.
This is exciting. I mean, there's a lot we talk about in our space around all these tailwinds that I think are just inherently making this conversation around ecosystems more exciting. And one of them is kind of related to that narrative of the death of the cookie, right? As major vendors are making it harder and harder to have apps track you, and things like GDPR come into the fold and kind of force acceptance, active opting in around cookie use. A side effect of that is it trickles down through these massive data sets that are used for targeted advertising, which become, part of the strategies around ABM, which become part of how data gets enriched for outbound sellers and SDRs to actually do their work. And in a world where those windows are closing, or we're reaching some form of market saturation around those strategies where they're no longer differentiators, but they're just table stakes, it does beg this question of what's next? Like, where can companies go to get an edge? And I think this conversation around the evolution of partnerships into ecosystems is a really good answer to that question. And there's a lot we've talked about today that points to why that is, but it feels like we're really in the early innings of partnerships, or whatever modern branding we want to put on it is kind of going to finally have its day in the sun, because it is an answer to breaking down those walls, and it is not so widely done well yet that the companies that have figured out how to do it can use it to have an edge.
Bob brings up a really great point, and the role of influencers, which we haven't done a very good job of tracking the influence strategy. I mean, we talk about the Kim Kardashians of the world and being paid millions of dollars for Instagram, But seriously, in our world of ecosystems and technology, there will be more and more organizations that don't transact, that add value to the customer's decision process, which has become much more like a consumer purchase, right, in our new world. And so we need to think through that. And technologies like Bob's technology at Crossbeam and PartnerTap, I'm sure, are looking out towards the future and the role of influencers in driving behavior, client behavior.
That's a great point. It's I trust you, Vince. Who do I buy from?
That's right.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I think we've just come up to the hour. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to you folk. You know so much more about this than I do. It stimulated a lot of thoughts and thinking on my side, which I really enjoy. So thank you very much for participating. Special thanks to Bob, who can now go back to bed, and to Tony, who can go to bed for the first time.
Thank you, everyone. Let's go to the networking lounge.
Great.
Take care.